Yeah.
The Out of Bounds Show is powered by the award-winning golf courses at Dancing Rabbit Golf Club in Philadelphia, Mississippi.
We are the Out of Bounds Show, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. Brought to you by Ace Bolt and Screw. Powered by DeWalt Tools. Ace Bolt and Screw, 4 locations. Ace Bolt and Screw, powered by DeWalt Tools. Downtown Jackson. Their new one, Gluckstadt, Madison County, new location. Tupelo in Atlanta, acebolt.net. Leading fastener distributor in the Southeast, Ace Bolt and Screw, powered by DeWalt Tools. We are live in the Bank Plus studio. It is a Farm Bureau Insurance Monday as we recap the weekend. Farm Bureau Insurance Monday as we recap the weekend. And Mississippi State continues to struggle on offense. And the fan bases, well, and our next guest website is in meltdown mode with what all is going on. And I said this earlier, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And now that you're going to ride with a true freshman, it's going to be extremely difficult for him with that offensive line and the players around him. Steve Robertson joins us. His new book, Alpha Dogs, is sold around the state of Mississippi, including the Y'all Lifestyle Shop. Great Christmas gift, Alpha Dogs. Podcast, The Boneyard, and then, of course, genespage.com, 247 Sports. So Steve does it all as far as covering sports and recruiting. Oh, Steve, I don't know where to start here, though. I think it will probably get worse before it gets better because they're going to throw an 18 or 19-year-old out there now probably for the better part of the season with Will Rogers. And with that offensive line and the personnel around him, there is no quick fix. What do you see?
Well, it's one of those deals where even though you expected to lose a lopsided ball game, it doesn't make it any easier to take when it happens. It's kind of one of those self-fulfilling prophecies. But, honestly, I thought Will Rogers actually showed a better command of the offense, and he just seems to have a better feel for the game than Costello did. And I think now that, Costello, I guess, I would assume is in concussion protocol, I think that gives Mike Leach, number one, probably the cover to go ahead and make the change, but also, too, you've got Vanderbilt coming in, so it's not a top 10 opponent. So you probably put him out there and ride with him and see what happens. But, I thought the offensive line at times played better, probably better than they have the last couple of weeks. They've reshuffled some things. You've got Cole Smith back at center, and Cam Jones played at right tackle. And listen, that's a tough assignment for anybody, especially a guy making his first collegiate start. But, the hope is that Will Rogers can lead the state to a victory on Saturday, and you can kind of begin to see some progress because the last 3 weeks there really hadn't been any.
Yeah. I guess y'all expect to hear more on Marks, the running back, too, over the course of the next couple of days?
Yeah, Leach is kind of coy when it comes to updating injuries. But, and listen, and Jaquavius Marks I thought was a bright spot on Saturday, even though there weren't a whole lot of them. And I thought he played hard and tried to make plays. And on the play that he got injured, he's sitting there wrestling with an Alabama defender for the football, trying to prevent a turnover. And, he slammed to the ground pretty hard there. And it looked to be out of it. He and Costello both I would assume, are in the concussion protocol now. But as we get later in the week, we'll get some, hopefully get some updates on his availability. But I suspect, certainly if he can play, he will play. But I thought Witherspoon came in relief of him there in the second half and actually played pretty well. So if you have to run with Dylan Johnson and Lee Witherspoon, I think you're probably okay. But certainly would be better suited to have a guy like Marks, who I think is the more talented of the three backs available.
Sure. Steve Robertson on the Miller Lite guest line. Steve, what about who is the backup? If Costello is out and Will Rogers is the starter, with Jalen Maiden and Garrett Schrader and all these guys heading out, I don't know if it's the Vanderbilt transfer or some other dude that I haven't heard of, but who is the backup to Will Rogers if that's the case? Blake Scott said he may be, but go ahead.
Yeah, Blake needs to get ready. You're looking to walk on. I mean, that's as simple as that. I mean, when you have two scholarship quarterbacks enter the portal and another one that is a little bit banged up, I mean, I'm sure if Costello can go, I'm sure that he would be your emergency backup. Because there's a lot of time between now and game day. But I think no matter what happens with Costello this week, I think you have to start Will Rogers, and then you kind of figure out your depth from there. But I mean, you're looking at a walk-on, and that's the situation that we're in now. And at the end of the day, and it's one thing that I shared on my show, is that you can't fault Jalen Maiden and Garrett Schrader for entering the portal now. And I know some people say, well, you finished what you started. Well, I mean, I guess that's true to a certain extent. But if you wait to the end of the season, which is not going to end until the early part of December, and then you've got a December signing period there a couple weeks later, you really limit your options as a quarterback. And I think those guys need to get in the portal, make themselves available to schools. And that way they have a real chance in January to join a program and then enroll for spring practice. And so at the end of the day, everybody has to make the decisions that are best for themselves. And so I don't fault them, but it does put Mississippi State in a very precarious situation when it comes to quarterback depth.
Yeah. Well, that'll be interesting to see if this thing continues to go the other way. Had Jalen Maiden stayed on the roster, he would have played and been able to get some reps on tape. Who knows? Steve Robertson on the Miller Lite guest line. You're listening to 105.9 The Zone, ESPN, WRKS. Steve, I think when you look at this offensive personnel, and you may not agree or go there, just depending, this hodgepodge of offensive personnel is just, well, a lot of G5. And I think when you look at this is Mullen's senior class. It had Colin Hill in it. He's no longer on the team. And then the sophomore and junior class, it doesn't look like Joe Moorhead got a lot done. I just don't think there's a lot there, Steve. And this is going to be a major rebuild that I think Mullen was able to mask for. He was just good enough in what he did with a running QB. And Joe's offense would have been terrible this year too. They may move it a little bit more with Schrader and Colin. But I think this is a major rebuild on offense. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I do, because it's such a dramatic departure from what you did offensively, where you had to have the quarterback that was more of a dual threat guy, and now you really only want him to run, in situations where he's, when things break down. You're not running a lot of design quarterback run stuff. I mean, there's not a Nick Fitzgerald out there, and Garrett Schrader is a guy that really runs that dual threat offensive stuff pretty well. While he's not necessarily the most polished passer, when things break down, he can tuck it and go. And so you just get a sense of guys like Will Rogers, and you saw some of it on Saturday, even against Alabama on that 3rd and 10. He tucks it and goes. I don't know that Costello makes that play. I think Costello probably gets 4 or 5 yards and then you punt. But I think Will gives you more of a dynamic quarterback back there that can make plays when that offensive line can't protect as long as it should. And I really thought that his mobility probably extended some drives that maybe Costello couldn't have. I think there were some times he would be a sitting duck back there because he's just really more of a pocket passer. But, it's interesting just because of the fact that you've got so many guys recruited to run a different scheme from the offensive line to the wide receivers, and now they're being asked to do a little bit more. And I think we're actually finally starting to see Austin Williams kind of realize his potential, and I think he could be big down the stretch, and certainly need a big ball game out of him this Saturday.
If you think your site has melted down before, and look, for you and for me, it's better when these teams are really good or really bad. Obviously, Mississippi State is really bad. But if they lose this game on Saturday, all right, let me ask you this. Since you've been doing this, what's the biggest meltdown on your site, on genespage.com?
That's a great question. You probably have to go back maybe the early 2000s.
Oh, the main loss or something like that?
Yeah, the main loss was really bad.
South Alabama?
Final Jackie year was really bad. The South Alabama loss, and that's the one. That's the one game that Mullen lost that you look at and say that's the signature loss. Dan did a good job of beating the teams he was supposed to beat, and he loses that one, and was really kind of a harbinger of things to come for that 2016 season. But it would be losing to a winless Vanderbilt team at home would be that would rival anything that we've had in my career.
Zach Arnett may need to be the MVP, Steve and Blake, for Mississippi State on Saturday, because if they can't score, then maybe MSU can kick enough field goals to win the game. I want to go to the air raid. There are people chirping left and right on your board, genespage.com, on my Mississippi Ag text line, and on the show that the air raid can't work. Now, we had Matt Wyatt. Matt sees more than I do. We had Matt on the show last week, Steve. He said nonsense, that this offense can work. It's just got to be retooled and so on. Now, Leach is running the true air raid, Steve. I mean, Lane and Levy are running a updated version of the air raid through Art Briles. You look at Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. You look at Sonny Dykes at, SM. You know where I'm going. Miami with Rhett Lashley. The list goes on and on. Graham Harrell at Southern Cal. Are we to a point where he has to change and tweak and adapt and innovate his air raid just because of what's happened in the game? Or can he run the true air raid and this thing work at the SEC level?
Well, I think it can work at the SEC level. I think it's a matter of personnel. But I think, maybe right now you look at it and say, okay, probably have to make some modifications based on what Will Rogers and the personnel available can do for you. But I think long term, I think Mike Leach will be who Mike Leach has been. And, that's the thing that people bring up and say, well, the defensive ends in the SEC are so much bigger and better and quicker and faster. They had, top 10 recruiting classes at USC. And they had, top 10 recruiting classes at Texas. I mean, so this is not like all of a sudden this scheme is seeing elite pass rushers for the first time. It's just you've got some guys out here. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Cam Jones is a redshirt sophomore, and Charles Cross is a redshirt freshman. I mean, you've got guys out there that are facing these monsters in the SEC for the first time. And I think that's the bigger issue here is not that there's a problem schematically. It's just that you've got to get your personnel kind of fine-tuned and ready to go. And I agree with the guy that actually played quarterback in the Southeastern Conference, a guy like Matt Wyatt. It's because of the fact, Matt sees practice. We don't. Matt is able to go to practice sometimes and see what's going on. So he sees the concepts and he sees what's being taught. That's not always showing up on game day. But, I think it can work. I think you've got to be who you are and be true to yourself and your own principles. But, it's painful right now for Mississippi State fans because, most people felt like, maybe we win a couple ball games. I don't think anybody expected State maybe to have a winning record after 5. You hoped you would. But it's not so much that they've lost. It's how they've lost. It's really got people upset. It's because, we expected to be losing ball games 56-42. We never thought in a million years the defense would be as good as it's been. But, when you're not scoring points and you've had 2 ball games where you don't score an offensive touchdown, it's hard to feel positive about any of that.
It doesn't look like to me, Moorhead's sophomore and junior classes on offense, what's there? What happened? I mean, what direction was he going? It's just the biggest hodgepodge of players that I think I've seen in a long time, Steve.
Well, I think offensive line recruiting the first year under Joe was really kind of a moving target. I thought they did a pretty good job. That that second year, you get Charles Cross, you get Nick Pendley, who is no longer with the program, but you got some building blocks. But offensive skill wise, I thought they took some chances on some guys and hoping they can develop. And here's the thing about developmental players. They got to be there to develop, and so you've had some attrition, so some of those guys are gone. But, give him credit for getting Dylan Johnson to Quavius Marks because I believe, the future at running back is very good. He went out and got some dynamic guys that could catch the ball as well as be ball carriers. And so you certainly give him credit for that. But one of the things that I go back to, we think the very first offer in the Joe Moorhead era was to Garrett Schrader. And now that we know what we do about Garrett, Garrett wasn't the best fit for that scheme. Garrett was a guy that probably fit the Dan Mullen scheme better than the Joe Moorhead scheme. And so you go get a guy that's not a perfect fit. I mean, you act like he is, and you say this is the guy that's going to take us forward, and that's not being critical of Garrett. But his skill set doesn't necessarily match up with the offensive vision that Joe Moorhead laid out for us.
Steve Robertson, genespage.com on the Out of Bounds show and the Miller Lite guest line. You're listening to 105.9 The Zone, ESPN, WRKS. MSU coming off a 41-0 loss. And now it's the battle of the cellar dwellers. MSU against Vanderbilt this week. Seriously. I mean, this sounds crazy. Obviously, Mike Leach isn't going anywhere, but there's a lot on the line for Leach and his offensive staff this weekend. Blake, you have a question for Steve Robertson.
Yeah, Steve, partially kind of with what Bo mentioned, because we've talked about this off the air, with the adaptation or the evolution of the air raid and then partially what you mentioned with the lack of talent on Mississippi State's roster, what's the biggest step for Mike Leach to take the disaster of 2020 and make it salvageable in 2021? Is it you have to add receiver talent? Is it all about the offensive line? Is Will Rogers really the answer, or do they still have to go find somebody? But I mean, what's the fix that Mississippi State fans can go, okay, thank God we're not going to go 3-9 next year, or maybe 3-9 is what it's going to be next year?
Ooh.
Well, you certainly hope not. But, yeah, I mean, you've got some great receiver talent coming in, and you signed a really good receiver class this year. So you're kind of beginning to stack some pass catchers. But, yeah, I think what Bulldog fans want to see down the stretch is they want to see Will Rogers and see this young offensive line begin to kind of find some continuity and win some ball games. You know, it's not as simple as, okay, let's go score a touchdown, even though that seems like, you know, the big chore right now is just finding a way to get into the end zone. But I think starting to see some elements of this offense being successful and finding some rhythm, win or lose, I think that's what people want to see. They want to see that this team is getting better. And there's no evidence of that Saturday. Even as well as I thought the defense played at times, they were just out-talented. I mean, let's be honest, give Sarkisian a lot of credit. You find a way to get Devontae Smith, who is arguably the best receiver in the Southeastern Conference, perhaps the nation. You find a way to get him paired up on a walk-on safety 2 or 3 times. You're going to win that every time. And so, you know, that's where I think, you know, State's a little bit talent deficient. But on the offensive side of the football, you've got to be able to show that your scheme can work too. You've got to be able to scheme some people up and begin to make some plays. Because that was the thing on Saturday, is even when they moved to football, you have this crazy snake bit thing where, you know, I even asked Leach in the postgame about it. You know, Osiris Mitchell has a touchdown, and then Dylan Moses rips the ball away from him. And that's not the first time that's happened. I believe it's 4 times this year that a sure touchdown pass has went off the hands of Bulldog receiver for an interception. I don't know that I've ever seen anything like it. I asked Mike about it, and he kind of said the same thing. He goes, you know, we probably lead the nation in that statistical category if they keep such a thing. But sometimes it just feels like this team is snake bit. That's why I think on Saturday they need a defensive touchdown or a kick return. They need something, a non-offensive touchdown, something to get them going and try to give them some confidence.
All right, let's walk through the recruiting. And I don't know how many of these guys are going to stay or stick, depending on the results of what's happened and what could happen the next few weeks. But we'll start with this collection of wide receivers and athletes on 247 Sports Gene's page. Theodore Knox, Malik Neighbors, MJ Daniels, Brandon Buckhalter. I'm told Buckhalter is going to Ole Miss. But Knox, Neighbors, and Daniels. Walk me through, you know, who they are and what they are, and could they actually add production or depth to this? Is that realistic to this offense next year, Steve?
Well, unlike the freshman receivers of 2020, I think Knox and Neighbors and arguably Jacoby Moore could play next year. You know, Brandon Buckhalter, if he sticks with State, I think he's a guy that'll certainly compete. MJ Daniels will actually play start at corner and then probably grow into a safety in time. But when you look at what you had last year, I mean, you go out and you get Malik Heath. I mean, you had to go get that guy. And he's a guy that's shown some flashes this year, and we think long-term he's going to be great. But then you sign Caleb Ducking, who hadn't played a snap. You have Rufus Harvey that hadn't played a snap. You got Tulu Griffin, who's played, you know, very minimally, you know, and he's been out some too. But when you begin to look at this, you've got some guys now, you're kind of recruiting over some of the guys you already had. And I think Knox and Malik Neighbors are guys that can compete and contribute as true freshmen. And I think that's what you've got to do. You kind of get the framework together, and then you add the talent to it. And then I think you see the offensive success, you know, long term. But, you know, I think Teddy Knox is a huge recruiting win for Mississippi State, as is Malik Neighbors. And, of course, LSU's gotten back on Neighbors. But, you know, he stayed true. But that's the thing, you know, as a guy that's covered recruiting for as long as I have, over the course of a season, these guys look at it and say, okay, well, I've got a chance to go in and play next year. But, you know, when you've got, you know, no semblance of rhythm on offense, you begin to wonder if some of these guys won't begin to kind of second guess and think, you know what, well, maybe that's not the situation I need to go into. And that's the job the coaches have now, is to kind of reassure these guys to just kind of hold the course and sign and come on in January and be ready to compete for playing time next year.
Do you think that Leach will hold on to Sawyer Robertson, the QB out of Lubbock, Texas?
Yeah, I do. And honestly, I think that's probably one of the best things for Will Rogers, too, is I think Sawyer Robertson will come in here and make everybody better. And you and I both talk, Will probably a little bit undervalued as a recruit. But Sawyer Robertson was a guy that Mike Leach targeted when he was at Washington State. He was his guy. You go out and get he and Daniel Greek, and so you're already beginning to kind of retool that quarterback room with guys that Mike Leach picked out. I mean, we talked about Alan Walters a little bit earlier. That's the transfer from Vandy. His availability, I guess, is somewhat in question. I don't think that he got approved for eligibility this year, but be that as it may, you've got some guys coming in that Mike Leach kind of handpicked. So these are his guys, and everybody talks about, well, you got to get your guys in. In his offense, it's all predicated by quarterback play. You hadn't had a lot of great quarterback play this year, but now you're beginning to think about a vision for the future where you're playing with your quarterbacks rather than the guys you inherited.
We got a couple of more minutes. Steve Robertson on the Miller Lite guest line. How many guys do you think that they'll sign / transfer portal this year at MSU?
Well, they can sign 26, and I think they'll use the full allotment of 26. State's still up against the 83, but with the recent attrition to the roster, they're going to have no problem making room under the 83 now. I think we're one spot away from being there, and there'll be one or two guys leave for sure. We talked about that last week, but you've got 25 you can sign for 2021. You've got one initial counter left for 2020. And they'll use that on a mid-year guy, probably a junior college guy. So you'll see 26 new faces join this program. And some of those guys, especially on the offensive line and wide receiver, they're going to have the opportunity to graduate in December and enroll in January and take part in spring practice. And, the days of the early enrollment period are huge, especially for a team that's, probably going to count on some freshmen next year to really play.
Blake?
Yeah, real quick, Steve. Philosophy-wise, we've talked about the air raid versus like maybe the Kiffin-style air raid or even the Mullen Big Ten power run.
Lincoln
option.
Riley's another one.
Yeah,
he lets his
exactly.
quarterback run. Leach is not going to do that. He may have to adjust in year 2 or 3, but that's where he is
So
today.
my question to you is, given everything you know about Mississippi State and what they're set up to be, is the transition of the Leach system and then subsequently committing to that style of offense or some version of it moving forward the best way for Mississippi State to compete in the SEC moving forward, or should they go back to the Rich Rod Mullen style offense? Is that their best bread and butter?
Well, I think at Mississippi State, I think in order to truly compete and take a step forward and not just be a 7-5, 8-4 team, you got to be a little bit different. And I think that's one of the things that State offers is you only get a week to prepare for the air raid and the 3-3-5 scheme on defense. And so it makes State real difficult to prepare for. And so once you begin to get some sense of an offensive rhythm, you begin to make some plays down the field. And if you can just be average on offense, is what you've got on defense, you've got a chance to win some ball games. And so I think you have to stay the course.
Steve Robertson, genespage.com. Steve, book signing today, or does it start tomorrow?
Now it'll be Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at Mississippi Marketplace in Jackson.
There you go. Steve Robertson, genespage.com. Thanks, Steve. Take care.
See you, brother.
You can find his new book, Alpha Dogs, at the All Lifestyle Shop for Christmas in the Township. That's right. Steve Robertson's new book, Alpha Dogs. You can find it at the Y'all Lifestyle Shop in the Township. So Steve says it's going to work. Matt White says it's going to work. My Mississippi Ag John Deere tractor text line from the fans say, burn it down. It's not going to work. Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio at 9:30. Welcome in on a Monday. Hope you're doing well.